How do you turn this up? Ah, yeah, get myself down.
A very good morning to you and welcome to the sun-shining Nürburgring. Yes, it is the Nürburgring, and yes, the sun is shining for race 22 in the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, which is about to get underway here. The first race on track for this fantastic weekend, which includes not only the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, but many other categories as well, including DTM. But there you can see the grid assembled, ready for this race, and there, P1... Quelle surprise, Mr. Lance Stroll for Prema Power Team. He who is leading the championship by a phenomenal number of points and has been the subject of much media rumour across the course of the last 5 days as to where he will be and what he will be driving next year. From everyone that we've spoken to in the paddock, and you would expect us to work very, very hard to get the very latest information, there is nothing official. Alongside him goes Nick Cassidy for the same team, Prema Power Team. Then Nick Cassidy with a good qualifying session, which puts him P2. Then we will find, going from P3, Maximilian Günther. And there's a bit of a familiarity here with regards to the car and team, isn't there? Alongside me from the motorsportarchive.com is Leo Gorman, who is knowledge of Formula 3 is encyclopedic to the point of yawn sometimes. But yeah, I mean, Prema, what a qualifying session for them.
It's very much a red and white livery, the first couple of rows, isn't it? I think the only difference here is P4, George Russell, who's with High-Tech GP. Very much a kind of, I suppose in a sense, the joint second team of this year, along with Van Amersfoort. Good effort by George Russell, who's having a good late run. He's brought himself up to third in the championship after a very strong round at Spa. But really this weekend so far has been very much about Prema. 1, 2, 3 on the grid. The only difference being Guan Yu, who's down in P8, who was originally actually qualified close to the front but received a penalty for blocking in qualifying.
Joel Eriksson that we look at then, who made a graduation to Formula 3, of course, from the ADAC Formula 4 series, and as did Ralph Aron then, another one of the Prema Power Team drivers that is on the grid for race number 1, which is around about 7 minutes away from lights out. And behind Ralph Aron, it is Callum Eilert that will be going from P7 on the grid. And if I'm honest with you, expected Callum to find a little bit more perhaps in the qualifying sessions, Lee.
Yeah, it's been a bit difficult actually for the Van Amersfoort quartet this weekend. I was chatting to the team principal, Fritz Van Amersfoort, yesterday, and he was telling me that they're not one particular area that they seem to be dropping back on, but rather they just seem to be losing small amounts in every section on the track, and they haven't really been able to nail down exactly what that is.
Oh, interesting. Lee, of course, will be giving us insight during the course of the race as well. You and I were in a conference yesterday with regards to tyres and tyre performance here at the Nürburgring, and something we both learned, I think, we both realise and understand just how well used the Nürburgring as a track is. And it is, in Europe, one of the busiest racing circuits. And what they were saying in Hankook yesterday is the fact that there are so many different types almost of tarmac around the circuit where it has been patched, and there are areas that are more worn than others. And from a tyre perspective, from a tyre point of view, and I wonder if this has anything to do with Van Amersfoort trying to not quite being able to unlock what is necessary, is because the actual surface of the track is so different across its entire length that you kind of just have to take a compromise across all of it.
Yeah, that's part of the issue, but I think Fritz was also alluding to the fact that when it comes, for some strange reason, and they suffered this at other events this year as well, that they do seem to struggle when it gets hotter. And this is one of the unusual aspects about Nürburgring this weekend. We're so used to this circuit having constantly changeable weather conditions. We expect it to be rain. And you know, it's been an absolutely wonderful couple of days here. Very warm, very hot, and we're expecting the same tomorrow.
Absolutely.
But as as Fritz was saying to me, that sometimes in the really warm weather, they've struggled to maybe unlock that last bit. Now, you do make a good point about the patchy tarmac across the circuit. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, Formula One hasn't really been here for a few years now. And as such, the surface hasn't been relayed across the entirety of the Grand Prix circuit for maybe 5 or 6 years or something like that. And maybe now that we're getting to that 5-6 years, it's probably beginning to feel it a little bit. Okay.
What was also interesting in the Hankook press conference yesterday and dialogue that we had with Thomas from Hankook was the fact that all the data that the engineers have available to them for Nürburgring is, of course, in very changeable weather conditions and actually not conditions that we are expecting and are likely to receive for this weekend. So, going to be a very interesting race, that's for sure. From a point situation, Lance Stroll then on 296 before it's Maximilian Günther in P2 on 235. So it's a really healthy lead that Lance Stroll has over Maximilian Günther. Then it's George Russell, Nick Cassidy and Callum Ilott is P5 in the championship with Joel Eriksson in P6. So as the remainder of the engineers make their way off the track, we'll get the formation lap underway very, very soon indeed. And the first of 3 FIA Formula 3 European Championship races as we reach the sharp end of the championship now with just Nürburgring here this weekend, then Imola and the season finale at Hockenheim to come to do. So it is very much the sharp end of the championship as we zoom in on Maximilian Günther there, just preparing his gloves.
And I think one of the other aspects of this weekend is while we are getting to the sharp end of this championship, and Lance does have a 61-point lead over Günther, Lance cannot actually secure the championship this weekend. If he got maximum points and Maxi didn't score any, the gap between the top two would open up to about 136 points. There'd still be 150 available for the last 2 rounds that are to come at Imola and Hockenheim. But a good weekend for Lance this weekend could really go a long way to helping him into a big position.
Well, let's see as we see the cars released then on their formation lap. It's been an incredible year of FIA Formula 3 European Championship racing that we have enjoyed. And it's not done yet. And as Lee has said, despite Lance having a very, very healthy position in the points, he still needs to max everything he can out of the next 3 races here at the Nürburgring on his quest to become the FIA Formula 3 European champion for 2016. And perhaps if the media circus and the rumours and everything that's gone about in the press last week with regards to where he is going, potentially he needs that championship for a licence, doesn't he?
He does. He definitely needs to win this championship to get the super license points. What I think we also need to clarify is that should Lance win the championship, he doesn't automatically get those points for the super license. That only kind of turns over on December 31st, January 1st. So it's not like Lance can win the championship and then start in F1 in 2 weeks' time. He'll still have to wait until next year for the super license to be approved.
All of that, though, of course, at this stage is conjecture. As the cars make their way through what is the Bidol or NGK chicane, this 3.6 kilometre circuit, the Nürburgring track layout that is used here for the FIA Formula 3 European Championship. 11 turns, 7 right and 4 left, and it really is a very, very challenging circuit which generally delivers fantastic, breathtaking racing.
Turn 1's going to be absolutely key because it's a long way down to the first corner. It's downhill, so you have to brake late to maintain your position. But if you brake too late, you go wide onto the runoff area, and you give the opportunity for the person behind you to move another position. And
what I've always said about turn 1 here is it's jolly near a hairpin. Because you come back upon yourself, you're going downhill at the same time. You're absolutely right. There's lots of runoff area, so there is opportunities for people to do good and also do very bad at turn number 1. We just await the final cars of Barnecote and Mazepin and Jensen and Newey and PK to form into their grid boxes before we get the green flag from the marshal at the rear. And there, that camera angle gives us the elevation change down into turn 1. You are going downhill. There is the green flag from the marshal at the rear. We are standing by. The lights are on. When 5 lights go out, we will be away and racing, as indeed we are. Lance Stroll gets away nicely then.
It's a very nice start there by Lance Stroll. Cassidy slots into second place. Russell has gone around the outside of Gunther, not got kind of do it. Stroll goes wide and off, but comes back and he's still first place.
And there you can see just how that runoff area can be used as they go into turn number 2 now.
And now they bleed out wide into turn 2, and it's a long lingering turn into turn 3, then into turn 4, which shoots him back into a short chicane and down onto a kind of short straight.
And Lance Stroll then leads the way, as was expected. An absolutely perfect start from him. Callum Ilott trying to make moves, and he was the one that, of course, went wide at turn number 1 and made it work for him as well. So, and there we just see Callum Ilott into the picture there as the rest of the cars come through. And so they run down between turn 6 and 7 now. Turn 7 being the bit curve before it is the long straight that runs along the paddock, the back of the paddock, and through the Advan Bogan turn into this Vidal NGK chicane. Heavy braking. First left, then right, and climbing back uphill again before heading towards the Coca-Cola turn. Pit in there, you can see in the picture as all the cars come through now, and a bit of a battle going on for very last at the moment.
And it's a solid start by Callum Ilott as well, who's gained a position to 6th place. Guan Yu has lost a few there. He's dropped down to P11. He lost a couple of positions in the turn 5 hairpin. But right now, it's Stroll leading by 0.3 of a second over Cassidy.
And George Russell taking a look at Maximilian Gunther as well. It's Stroll, Cassidy, Gunther and Russell at the moment. And Stroll has managed to eke out a 3/10 over Nick Cassidy.
And that's the key thing there about the long, lingering kind of turn 3, is there's multiple lines through there. You can go wide, but you also leave a gap on the inside. And if you have just enough traction, you can maybe stick your nose in, but doesn't always work. And Russell looking again into the hairpin in turn 5.
Absolutely. And what this is doing is Maximilian Gunther is now having to focus on defending from George Russell, and that has meant that that plays into the hands of Lance Stroll and also Nick Cassidy, who are able to get up the road now as George Russell continues his quest to try and find a way past Maximilian Gunther. Hasn't been able to do it yet.
Oh, and someone a slight slide there. I believe it was a Ben Barnicoat coming, or not Ben Barnicoat, probably Nick O'Carry coming out of the turn 6 corner there. Maybe just slightly got a slide off the curb, but may just saved it.
So there you can see demonstrably how Stroll and Cassidy have walked away from Maximilian Gunther, whose focus has been on defending from George Russell. Now, George Russell is not as close this time around the final turn as he was previously to line up Maximilian Gunther going into turn 1 as they start to go downhill now. Is George Russell going to outbrake Maximilian Gunther? Which line is he going to take? It's Gunther to the outside, dives in now, and as I said, George Russell is just nothing like close enough. And of course, he's got Ralph Aron, who's running in P5, and also the very racy Callum Ilott running in P6, lining up behind as well.
Aaron took 3/10 out of Russell in that lap, and then Ilott was also 3/10 quicker. So there, it's difficult for Russell in a sense to make a move on Gunther, because he doesn't want to leave the door open to get overtaken himself. And
sure,
Ralph Aron's going to be thinking the same thing, and that actually leads to a quite strange status quo sometimes, where drivers don't necessarily want to make a move because they leave themselves open. Yet at the same time, they're not actually gaining anything either.
So Callum Ilott very close to Ralph Aron now. That's going to be one to watch. And wherever we look, there are battles that are going on as just a little bit of dust is kicked up there as they go through the bit curve turn number 7. Here's a replay of the start then. Stroll did everything absolutely right, didn't he?
That was a very, very good start by Lance. And you can see instantly Maxi Gunther having to cut across the start-finish straight to block George Russell from 3rd place. George actually did get quite a good start, but I think he may have had to probably check himself a bit as Gunther came across.
But this now is where Callum Ilott goes around the outside and does use that runoff area, because they're 3 abreast there. He had to. There was no choice. He was run out there.
He got a bit of a bump, because if you look at you don't really see it there, but he comes back across the exit and the car just lifts a little. And
okay.
That's not necessarily the most comfortable driving style in the world.
Okay. So we watch this replay and the jostling of positions that are going on.
That was Guan Yu losing several positions coming into turn 5. He was a little bit too tentative, really, and some of the drivers around him, Nico Carey, Ben Barnicoat, probably just took advantage of that.
So Lance Stroll then is into his mojo. 1.1 second margin he has over Nick Cassidy. As there we focus on the man that's running in P6 at the moment. It is car number 6, and that is the young British star Callum Ilott then, who is chasing down Ralph Aron ahead of him. And he has Joel Eriksson behind him. Of course, there's a bit of history between Callum Ilott and Joel Eriksson in terms of comings together, as there have been many comings together during the course of the FIA Formula 3 European Championship season. And if we're honest, it's what we love about it, isn't it? Because the racing generally has been very, very close and very exciting. So Stroll then with 1.1 seconds to the good as we watch the cars through the chicane. Now, this chicane, unless you stand at the entrance to it, you don't realise just quite how uphill this is. And what always amazes me with these super
force a mistake from the driver in front of you, and sometimes that means being in the mirror or just make maybe little glances here and there to kind of put the driver ahead of you off, maybe distract them slightly and make them make a mistake. But you really need to be kind of thereabouts constantly throughout the race to be able to do that, as we see Ben Barnicoat really using the whole of the curb on the exit coming out of turn 4. But you really need to make a mistake, because actually just getting a draft on a competitor in this circuit, on this layout, should I say, can actually be quite difficult.
So Anton Hubert and Sergio Sette Camara then, as they make the run up towards that chicane now, turn in, and there you can see the number 10 car of Nico Carey, who is currently running in P8 with Joel Eriksson ahead, and it's Cassidy then who loses out another 5/10 to Lance Stroll, who's just really got into his comfort zone, hasn't he? And he's nailing every single lap at the moment. A 1:21.592 from Lance Stroll last time around, and he's the only driver in the 121s. Of course, he's got a clear track ahead of him.
There's a battle there between Sergio Sette Camara and Antoine Hubert for P10 as a last points paying position, and Sergio Sette Camara has won out that particular battle. But Hubert comes back down the inside. As I said, you can leave the door open through turn 3 and turn 4 if you take the wider line. Hubert doesn't quite make the move, but that is a position 1 there for Sergio Sette Camara.
So good driving from Sergio Sette Camara then, as he moves himself up a place.
And one thing I must add about Camara, he's probably the most annoyed driver, shall we say, in this race. Having set the actual fastest time in qualifying yesterday, he has a 10-place grid penalty for today's race and tomorrow's race because he had an engine change in Spa. So technically, he had actually done the best job in qualifying, but a lingering penalty has just dropped him into the mid-pack of the grid.
And what it also proves is that Motor Park have got a good handle on it, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
So there, we focused on the Mazepin car, and this in replay was how that was lined up.
And he did a very good job. I mean, initially going down the inside and played a dummy quite a bit and really forced his hand. Very, very good job there from Sergio Sette Camara. But good overtake.
That's how you can use that area, isn't it, to make your move stick. Well, just look at that gap now. I mean, we are seeing a truly measured performance, aren't we, from Lance Stroll, who's 3 seconds now to the good of Nick Cassidy, and we're only just 6 minutes into the race.
Is it too early in the race to say that he's strolling away with this?
Please don't use ridiculously. No, he is. He's. What's really been fascinating to watch this year is how he has matured as a driver, without question, and now delivers wherever possible, whatever he can. And we have seen so many great examples of fine driving as we look now at the Ralph Aron car, who's being chased down by Callum Ilott. The margin between the two of them is about 4/10. There's Stroll going through. Here comes Nick Cassidy then, and Maximilian Gunter, all spaced out nicely. In fact, the one here that is perhaps the closest is this battle. It's between Ralph Aron and Callum Ilott, running for P5 and P6, and even that isn't too close, although is Callum Ilott now, as he exits Coca-Cola turn, going to try and line up the Aron car ahead of him and make a move going into turn number 1. I don't think he's close enough to be able to do so.
No, he's not quite close enough. Aron's getting a very good, getting quite a good traction out of the final corner to get him just an extra little bit of speed coming down the start-finish straight, and it just pulls him enough away from Eilert to actually solidify that position.
And that must be ever frustrating for the young Brit, mustn't it, who's throwing absolutely everything at it and doing everything he possibly can to get as close as possible, only to have his opportunities thwarted. But that is part of the game, isn't it? And
I think one of the things that we glaze over sometimes, not just in Formula 3 but in motorsport, is we see how the drivers are they're following each other around, and they're setting quite solid lap times, 121s, 122s each time around. And it's very easy sometimes to look at it and go, well, you know, it's very easy, they're just driving around. But you know what? They are pushing very, very, very hard.
Of course.
And Callum, he's going to be, you know, it looks so simple, it looks so serene, but inside that cockpit, he's throwing the car around, he's making sure that he's getting the positions right, and he's monitoring what Ralph Aron's doing as well.
And he's closer this time as they come through the chicane, may I just say. And interestingly, last lap round, the only other person in the 121s apart from Stroll was Maximilian Günther. So, exit Coca-Cola turn, head down the start-finish straight once again then. And here is Callum Eilert on Ralph Aron, but again, not sure it's going to be close enough.
And it's Barnicoat being attacked by Nico Kari for a P8.
Yeah, and that was a good lineup from Nico Kari, wasn't it?
Not quite close enough. They were 0.3 apart coming across the line. And that's an example, really, of almost how close you need to be coming across the start-finish line to even have an attempt to make a move on a position ahead. 0.4 of a second, it sounds like nothing, but it's almost too much of a distance. The start-finish straight's simply not long enough to be able to pull in that kind of a gap before the first turn. So
Ben Barnicoat, Nico Kari running P8 and P9 respectively. They're the number 3, the 23 car of Guan Yu Zhu, who's running in P12. David Beckman is P13. Harry Newey, who we've not mentioned yet, is running in P14. Jensen 15, Mazepin is P16, and PK is running P17. A slightly depleted field of FIA Formula 3 cars for this Nürburgring round, because the eponymous British squad, Carlin, are missing. Lee, explain more.
Yes, it seems as if that Ryan Tavita a few weeks ago has decided he's not going to finish the rest of the season. He was initially going to do the Zandvoort Masters, but didn't make an appearance for that either. And following that, Alessio Lorandi, who I think is fair to say was probably considered the team leader of the 3 drivers that Carlin had, he's withdrawn as well. And I believe the 3rd driver, Wiran Tan, he's probably racing in Asia for the rest of this year, so my sources have told me. And so Carlin are just going to regroup. They have announced that they're going to try and get back with drivers for the final round at Hockenheim. And partially that to do with drivers who want to get in maybe a round before the Macau Grand Prix.
Right.
But they haven't announced who that will be. But it's very much we'll see at the moment. And it's a shame, really, because Carlin are a top team. They have been one of the top dogs in Formula 3 for many, many, many years. Top dogs in other categories, single-seater categories as well. And it feels a bit wrong, really, to be at a Formula 3 round and Carlin aren't here.
Well, we hope, of course, to see them back at Hockenheim. As once again, we follow this battle that's going on for P5 between Callum Eilert and Ralph Aron, and it's just the traction that Aron has out of that chicane is very, very strong, and that also thwarts Callum Eilert's attempts, because that's where he needs to almost make or start the setup for an overtake in turn 1 is coming out of that chicane, really. You know, you just line the car up and you get as close as you possibly can, then through the Coca-Cola turn. As we look at Joel Eriksson there, who's running in P7.
Well, it is almost it is a battle in a sense with your engineers. Do you set up the car for the fast section coming out of going through turn 6, the fast chicane, then going down turn 8 on the kind of little curve on the back straight, then try and do a high-speed setup where you can maybe get an advantage that way, or do you set yourself up for a medium downforce where you can easily take the chicane in the final corner to get yourself good position, good traction coming out of those corners, and with maybe a shorter gear ratios as well. there's lots of permutations in these cars. They may all be Dalaras, and they're a mixture of Volkswagen and Mercedes engines, but there's an awful lot you can do with these cars in terms of setup to give you advantages, or maybe some of these cars probably could be set up for qualifying, because they know overtaking here can be quite difficult. So you can set your car up for qualifying and just know that maybe you're just there enough to have a good race pace as well.
Okay, we're looking at the K-Styler 24 Muka Motorsport colours of David Beckman then, who is running in P13, one of the rookie drivers. The best of the rookies is running in P5 at the moment, and that's Ralph Aron, who's been chased and being chased by Callum Eilert, just 7/10 between the two of them. Lance Stroll is up the road, 4.4 seconds ahead of Nick Cassidy, leading the way.
And Gunther, he is taking bits out of Nick Cassidy over second and third place, but I really mean bits. The gap is thousandths of a second and hundredths of a second each time around. So, and the gap is still 1 second. So Gunther is not in a position at the moment to really make an attack on Nick Cassidy. And I think Nick Cassidy, in a sense, is probably measuring himself as well. He's got a long gap to Lance Stroll out front, as you said, 4.5 seconds. So he's not necessarily as... His front end is not necessarily being interrupted by the turbulent air coming off the back of Stroll's car. So he's able to control his pace to a degree as well. And Gunther is not taking enough out of him at this time to really make a go of it for second place.
And Lance Stroll, of course, is, he's comfortable out front, isn't he? He's... I've just noticed the last couple of laps have been in the 122s rather than in the 121s, which is what he has been driving at, but he's well within his comfort zone. And we just get a message on the screen to tell us that the incident between Sergio Seta Camara and Antoine Hubert in Turn 1 is under investigation. It's the first message that we've had up on the board, and that's really, really encouraging, where so often in the past with the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, and indeed other categories as well, it's been the dreaded track limits debate, hasn't it? As this is a super slow-mo of Lance Stroll. And that just illustrates what I was saying, Lee, about how supremely technical these wonderful cars are, and just how they throw them through that NGK chicane.
And you see how stiffly set up the Prema cars are as well. They can really hammer those curbs and really kind of be comfortable with it as well. And the only real battle at the moment is actually between Seta Camara and Antoine Hubert. Camara overtook Hubert a few laps ago, and I think they probably got quite close to each other, and maybe almost banged wheels going through turn 1, which is probably why the stewards are looking at that particular incident. But as it stands, the gap is just half a second between the two of them. Hubert has kind of caught Seta Camara back a bit, but is not really in a position yet to make a move on the Red Bull Junior driver. And a gap now, 4.7 seconds. I think really, with a lot of drivers dropping into the 22s now, we're just seeing the natural evolution of the tyres in this race. As we mentioned in the Hankook briefing yesterday, the tyres don't fall off as we see in categories such as Formula 1. These are not Pirelli tyres. These are long life tyres, if for want of a better description. The fall off is very, very gradual over the course of a race. So you might lose in a half-hour race or a 35-minute race, as this will be. They will probably lose a few tenths over the course of the whole race, but it won't be a significant degradation that will see them lose chunks of a second per lap.
So Callum Eilert then, continuing to chase down Ralph Aron. He's 5 tenths between the two of them, and whilst the point that Lee mentioned earlier on is as they come off the bank to turn 6 and 7 and down onto the long straight with the kink, which is turn 8, before heading up towards the NGK chicane. The pressure is being mounted on Ralph Aron, but in fairness, he's not made any errors at all, no mistakes, and therefore that doesn't advantage Callum Eilert in terms of being able to get ever closer to him. The incident that I mentioned involving the cars of Sergio Seta Camara and also Antoine Hubert will be investigated after the race. So there is David Beckman then in the Muka Motorsport colours that is currently running in P13, and they're all beginning to line up a little bit now behind Ben Barnicoat.
Yeah, Barnicoat's pace hasn't been hugely stellar for the second half of the race so far, and I do wonder maybe if the tyres are probably used a little bit more. Let's not forget, these are not the drivers not necessarily all on new tyres.
No.
These are tyres they probably used in practice and in qualifying as well. So they probably had several laps on them before this race even began. I think one of the key things to look at, as you said only a few moments ago about the drivers flinging their way through turn 6 and turn 7, that they're being banked corners, is when you actually fly into turn 6, it's banked on the right side. But it actually, the camber switches in the middle, in the short chute between those two corners. And it's not a braking corner. Turn 6 is not a corner you brake into. You lift off, you let the car drift, and the banking takes you through that right-hand turn, flings you across the circuit. Then you've got to go through 7, the short chute, and in short chute into 7, and then it's a banked left-hand turn, and that kind of catapults you onto the back part of the circuit where you have the curve into turn 8. And we do see Nick Cassidy has lost a lot of time to Gunther. Gunther's actually passed him. Cassidy has lost 2 positions on that lap, and he lost 5 seconds somewhere along the line, and he's continued to lose pace.
Ralph Aron now going past him, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what has happened to Nick Cassidy then?
I wonder if he's made a mistake there, because he seems to be back up to speed now. But it's actually allowed Callum Eilish to go around the outside of both of them. Ralph Aron got blocked. Eilish on the outside loses traction. But what a daring move by Callum Eilish.
He just controlled that in the runoff area, didn't you? You could see the car, the back end of the car stepped out, but he held on to it. And now he's being challenged by...
It's Aron. He's trying to get a position back. And I tell you something there. Callum Eilish got on the outside of the circuit, and you could just see the drift there. Walter Roll, former World Rally driver, is here this weekend. He's probably looked at that and gone, yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you control a car like that when there's no traction. But Cassidy must have made a mistake, because he actually he lost 5 seconds, but there doesn't seem to be anything critically wrong with the car. So I wonder if he's just had enough somewhere, and hopefully we will see it again shortly.
Maximilian Gunther and George Russell both running wide there off the back of the chicane as well. You're absolutely right that he's got the pace back, hasn't he, Cassidy? So there clearly can be nothing wrong with the car. It is just an error somewhere along the line. Hopefully we will see that in replay. Why did Nick Cassidy suddenly drop? And there you can see the car of Nick Cassidy now being hounded by Callum Eilish. Callum Eilish, of course, who's spent so many laps looking at the very, very same back end of a Prema car, but now it's a different driver. That will be the talking point of the race for ages and ages, won't it? It'll be Callum Eilish drifting and power sliding around that section in the Mercedes arena, which he held on to so very well. Brilliant driving.
And Ralph Aron, Nick Cassidy's teammate, is probably going to be a little bit upset with that, because not only did he drop 1 position to Callum Eilish in the end, he actually dropped 2 seconds on the last lap, and it's brought Joel Eriksson into play just behind him. But in one sense, Cassidy, if it is a mistake and he's regaining himself, he's putting him in a position where he won't get overtaken. And Aron's just found himself in the wrong part of the circuit, and it's let Callum Eilish go through around the outside. And Aron being blocked ended up losing 2 positions effectively. It's a shame, but I would really love to see what actually happened with Nick Cassidy.
Okay, so through the chicane they come. Callum Eilish is now trying to get as close as he can to the Prema car of Nick Cassidy, which is the car that is ahead of him now. Callum Eilish running in P5. Nick Cassidy is P4. There's Maximilian Gunther, who's 7.3 seconds behind the race leader Lance Stroll. George Russell goes through, who finds himself in P3, the final podium place, of course. Stroll, Gunther, Russell, then it's Cassidy, Eilish, Aron, then Joel Eriksson P7. Nico Carey is P8 with Ben Barnicoat P9, and Sergio Seta Camara then final points paying position in P10.
And everyone really down into the 22s at this stage. So Lance doesn't need to push that hard. As you said, he has that 7.3 second gap over Gunther. And we'll see the drivers later on. It'll be interesting to see what their tyre situations are like for the rest of the weekend, because some will have new tyres, some will have only used tyres for maybe the last 2 races of the weekend. So sometimes there are drivers who don't necessarily want to push as hard as humanly possible. And there's tactics in that. You know, you come through qualifying, you come through practice, and you judge what tyres you're going to use in those races, almost judged on what your grid position is and what advantage you can get somewhere. So, for example, if you have a driver who qualifies higher up the grid than normal, they might want to use new tyres in that race because they want to be able to maximise that grid position.
So, Lance Stroll then, if we needed a measure perhaps of his domination this season, we can see it on screen because it's 7.2 seconds ahead of this man, Maximilian Günther, who is running in P2. Then George Russell in P3 before we find Nick Cassidy, Callum Ilott, Ralph Aron. Then it's Joel Eriksson, Nico Carey, Ben Barnicoat and Sergio Satakamara, the top 10 as we zoom in on Callum Ilott then, who is running in P5 and chasing down that Prema car of Nick Cassidy ahead of him. And to be fair, Van Amersfoort have clearly found something overnight, haven't they? Because Callum Ilott is lapping within a tenth or so of Nick Cassidy. And there you can see the margin between the two of them.
I would wonder, actually, and I would need to speak to Fritz again after this race, but while it's still a lovely day here, it is noticeably a bit cooler here.
Yes.
There is more of a breeze, especially in the air. It's definitely not quite as warm as it was yesterday, so I wonder if maybe that's just brought the setup to Van Amersfoort.
Perhaps so. Yes, that's a fair point. So Ilott now tries to get as close as he can, but it's off the back of that chicane where Cassidy has got the traction out and seems to get the exit just slightly better as they downhill now run towards turn number 1. There's our P2 driver. There is P3, George Russell, and here comes Nick Cassidy with his P4 place, and Callum Ilott closes later on the brakes, but sadly, nothing like close enough to be able to mount a serious challenge. All he can do is just harry the Cassidy car ahead, who Nick Cassidy is more than well aware of the fact that the Van Amersfoort driver, Callum Ilott, is right behind and ready to pounce should there be any error. And we can only assume that it was an error that's caused Nick Cassidy to be into the P4 position now. Callum Ilott a bit closer than before. And we're into the final 6 and a bit minutes of this race. Where has the time gone?
And Lance Stroll out front. This is a story, really, of almost 2 half seasons, isn't it? The first 3 rounds, if you remember, Dave, Lance Stroll, he took 1 race win and had a few mistakes here and there, had almost a mini stall in Paul Ricard in the first race he won. But ever since the Red Bull Ring in May, Lance has taken 6 race victories of the 12 race.
Whoa! So shortcutting there.
And I wonder is that a repeat of the issue we had earlier on?
Possibly.
But it's given Callum is closer, it's 0.4 of a second, and we will see it now. That's George Russell going through, and here's Nick Cassidy.
Just
so he
no
locked up a brake and gone off. He's maintained some momentum, but he has got a lot of dirt in his tyres, as you can see on screen now, and that's going to take a few seconds a part of this lap to actually scrub off and get back to optimal traction, shall we say. But it allowed Callum Ilott to get closer and try and make a move, and he just wasn't close enough, unfortunately, coming across the line.
No, and had he been closer, he would have been able to perhaps benefit still further from that. So Maximilian Günther there is P2, but Ilott knows that. Just wonder whether it is part of it is the pressure that's being put on Nick Cassidy, because Callum has been there in his rearview mirrors for lap after lap after lap, or whether it is just the fact that we are reaching the final stages of the race and the tyre wear has got to the very end, hasn't it?
I do wonder maybe if possibly Nick made a mistake earlier in the race. Maybe he locked his tyre that was off screen.
Callum is closer now. Can he just find enough through this Coca-Cola turn and down the start-finish straight to reel in that Nick Cassidy car and have a go going into turn 1? He's certainly closer than he's been over the previous few laps. Is it going to be close enough as they head downhill now? Brake. And again, he is denied, isn't he? Because Nick Cassidy put the car in exactly the right place. And
I wonder really if the best option for Callum at this stage is maybe not to try and make an overtake into turn 1, but to try and place himself through turn 1 so he can get a good run from turn 2 and turn 3. Because coming out of the final corner, he's simply, even if Cassidy makes a small error, Callum's not close enough through that final corner to really pull off a move.
Well, it's been exciting to watch, and we're into the final 3.5 minutes of this race, and certainly Callum Eilert last time around was 8 1/1000ths quicker than Nick Cassidy. So there is Cassidy in P4. Callum Eilert running in P5 as they head up towards the chicane again. Callum Eilert takes a sneaky look at the inside. Cassidy then actually really rather smooth through the chicane on that occasion, not taking too much curb as they head now towards the final turn. Start to go just briefly uphill before it is the downhill run into turn number 1, which leads us nicely into turns 2, 3 and 4. The Mercedes Arena. There's Callum Eilert then just lining up the Prema car ahead of him. And Callum Eilert dives, looks at the inside, but again, Nick Cassidy's got it all seemingly under control, although Cassidy runs very, very wide, and that allows Callum Eilert to get just a little bit closer, but frustratingly for him, not close enough.
Replay now.
This has got to be Stroll, hasn't it? He's out there on his own.
Yeah, there's... Oh, someone's slowing in the background.
Well, that's got to be the Cassidy incident, hasn't it?
Maybe that's it, yes. So I think the TV director has found it, yes. That's where he seems to have lost...
Well, that was really curious.
Because that doesn't look like a mistake.
No, it's not a mistake area, is it?
No. Very unusual.
Little job for you after the race, isn't it, to ascertain what happened there. So there is Maximilian Günther then, who's been out on his own in P2, is a couple of seconds over George Russell, who's running in P3. Lance Stroll then, who's just miles up the road. And Callum Eilert now has dropped back a bit from Nick Cassidy. Cassidy hoping and feeling that perhaps he has done enough, as this time he takes a little bit more of the curve, certainly on the entry to the chicane.
You cannot complain about the strength of the Prema suspension at all, can you?
Lawrence Stroll then, father of Lance, then watches on from the Prema pit wall at another very, very strong performance from Lance then, who is 7 seconds to the good, and it's actually slower than Maximilian Günther last time around, but he's got such a comfort zone, hasn't he, in terms of space between himself in P1 and in P2, that he's able to just drive his own race at his own pace, and rest assured that he's done the work that he's needed to do. And from pole position has led the race and led it with style, it has to be said. There's Günther then in P2. Before we find George Russell running in P3. George Russell, of course, running with the high-tech squad. So it's a good result for high-tech GP, isn't it? P3 with George Russell. And then it is Nick Cassidy and Callum Eilert that we see now. And Callum Eilert driving, of course, for the Fritz van Amersfoort team.
The only kind of... really note at this point in the race is the top 5 in this race are running as the top 5 in the championship.
Yes.
With Stroll, Günther, Russell, Cassidy and Eilert. So we will just see the kind of the gaps between those positions just in the championships just eke out a small bit, but no major changes in this race. I believe we're on is this the penultimate lap? This would be the penultimate lap, wouldn't it?
So 2 laps left to run for car number 1 and for all the other cars in the field, of course. But Lance Stroll then, who Günther's taken another 0.3 out of his lead on that lap, but it is still, in relative terms, a huge margin, 6.7 seconds, as Callum Eilert knows that he's only got 2 laps left within which to try and provoke and push maybe Nick Cassidy into making an error which would give Callum Eilert the opportunity to go past him and convert that P5 up to P4. And what I really, really like about this is the fact that Eilert is not prepared to sit back and just bank the points for P5. Damn it all, he wants P4. So he has tried and tried and tried relentlessly, hasn't he? Every single lap, Callum Eilert, and continues to do so here. It will be really interesting to find out, and we will, I promise, tell you when we get into race 2, exactly what caused that Nick Cassidy incident, which saw him lose a number of places and quite a bit of time. But Callum Eilert then continuing to chase down that Nick Cassidy car through the Ad Van Bergen turn number 8, which is the kink along the long back straight. And Callum Eilert now into the chicane. Gets very, very close, but that's where I think that the difference is noticeable. It's just that the Cassidy exit from that chicane is always seemingly just marginally better than that of Callum Eilert. And Eilert now starts the run into turn number 1. And we'll start the final lap of this race. So it is now or never.
And it's consistent. It's 0.4 each time around.
Yeah.
And Eilert just cannot nail the final corner to the degree that Nick Cassidy can. One minor change in the lineup in this race: Anton Huber is back ahead of Sergio Sette Camara for the final points position.
Ah, right.
And I mean, obviously, the incident between them from earlier in the race is still going to be investigated by the stewards, but it looks as if the Frenchman, the former French Formula 4 champion, has gotten that points position back for Van Amersfoort.
Well, it's been a masterclass in terms of how to drive the Nürburgring circuit and to max out of not only the car but also the track as well by this man, Lance Stroll. Real showpiece drive from him as he heads into the chicane now, uphill, and then through that chicane. Just one more turn to do before he adds yet another victory to his tally in this, the FIA Formula 3 European Championship. And Lance Stroll heads towards the checkered flag to take another win. A great drive from Lance Stroll. He wins. And could just see Maximilian Günther then rounding the final turn to take P2. P3, a good result, I would say, for George Russell. Then it is going to be Cassidy, who's chased across the line by Callum Eilert, P4 and P5. Then it will be Ralph Aron that takes P6. Joel Eriksson, P7. Nico Carey and Ben Barnicoat, and then Antoine Huber. And congratulations all round then on the Prema Power Team pit wall. So the first 5 drivers: Stroll, Günther, Russell, Cassidy and Eilert. And then the next 5 drivers, interestingly, Leo Gorman, all rookies.
Yeah, absolutely. Ralph Aron taking the rookie win this time around, with Joel Eriksson second and Nico Carey in 3rd place on the rookie podium. You can't really fault Lance in that, can you?
Well, there is no fault, is there?
No.
Just drove it perfectly.
Led from the start from finish. Very good start. He got a good start, and to be fair, Nick Cassidy got a good start as well, but Lance had just enough coming into turn 1 to kind of keep that position and solidify. I mean, he wasn't even really under pressure from Cassidy going into turn 1. Cassidy was, I think, more concerned with what Günther and Russell were doing behind him. But that was absolutely faultless, as we see the drivers kind of go around and onto the dirty part of the track because they pick up rubbish, dirt and grime onto the tyres to kind of bring the weight of the car back up somewhat. And there is an awful lot of dirt and grime on this Nürburgring circuit. I just noticed that. But yeah, absolutely flawless performance by Lance. I didn't really there's nothing else really to kind of to say about that.
Well, what it's done is, it's the first part of what he needs to achieve this weekend, and that is to max his points haul as they head into the next round at Imola, where of course he could, dependent upon results this weekend and results at Imola, where he could seal it, couldn't he? As we see a super slow-mo of the checkered flag falling on the number 1 car of Lance Stroll and Prema Power Team. And there the congratulations betwixt engineers.
I do believe. Yes, he's done it. He's done it again.
Really lovely, isn't it?
I think I've seen him do that at every single Prema win this season. That brings Lance's gap up to 8 points over Günther.
Confirmation of the result then. Lance Stroll takes the win from Maximilian Günther, P2. George Russell, P3. Nick Cassidy, P4. Then it was Callum Eilert, Ralph Aron, Joel Eriksson, Nico Carey, Ben Barnicoat, P9. And in P10 it was Anton Huber with Sergio Sette Camara, Guan Yu Zhu, David Beckman, Harrison Newey, Mikkel Jensen, Nikita Mazepin and Pedro Piquet. And pleasingly, we lost absolutely no one in the race. All started, all finished. And finishing P1, that man, Lance Stroll, who's about to exit the car. Maximilian Günther is alongside him. George Russell not yet made it into the parking area. So Günther straight over to congratulate his teammate, Lance Stroll, which is nice to see. Lance makes his way out of the car now, and it'll be another top step of the podium appearance for the young Canadian.
He's just do a stretch.
He didn't, well, it's just muscle tone and tension, isn't it?
I checked a slight mistake there a moment ago. Of course, Stroll has added 8 points to his lead over Günther. The gap is now 69 points for Lance in the championship.
It's very healthy, isn't it? And here is the Drivers' Championship. 321 points then for Lance Stroll. It's 253 for Maximilian Günther, with George Russell on 209. Just 3 points ahead of Nick Cassidy, P4. Then it is Callum Isler on 193 points. So that battle for P3 in the points is actually still very close, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is something Russell's really going to have to fight for the next two races this weekend. Gunther is, of course, P1 for the third race.
Super slow-mos then of the top three. George Russell for High Tech GP then takes a P3. Young East Anglian star then on the third step of the podium in race 1. P2 has a little sideways moment there as he throws it through the chicane. Is Maximilian Gunther then for the Prema Power Team. And then it was, as I've said previously, faultless performance from Lance Stroll. He too was not afraid of attacking the sausage curves through turn number 9 and 10, both entry and exit. But he has taken another fantastic win. Lance Stroll, race winner then here at Nürburgring in race 1.
We did see a good bit of power sliding in that, didn't we?
Yes, it was.
Unfortunately, they don't award points for that in the Drivers' Championship.
Best entertainer of the day, yeah. So, Nürburgring, bathed in sunshine. You made a fair point earlier on, which we can explore a little bit more, and that is that the temperatures are, despite it being very, very nice here, they are down on yesterday, aren't they? It's not as hot as it was.
It was very hot yesterday. And, of course, that affects tire degradation, the amount of heat you get in the tires, etc. If it's too hot, some teams will struggle with traction, and maybe it could be something as simple as that. As Fritz said to me, there doesn't seem to be anything particularly glaring in setup that affected the 4 Van Amersfoort cars yesterday. It just seems that none of them could work to the optimum effects. When it comes to today's race, and it is a little bit cooler, and they seem to have a lot more pace. Callum Isler, who I think, in fairness, we can safely say is probably is the lead driver of the 4, was really able to maximise that to a degree. But it did take a mistake from Nick Cassidy, which in turn blocked Ralph Aaron, for Callum to go through and take P5. You should note as well, I mean, Callum did qualify P9. Yesterday, but penalties for Sete Kamara for the engine change and Guan Yu Zhu for impeding in qualifying actually brought him up to P7 on the grid. P5 is not a bad result. I think he'll be quite happy with that, but I think he may be scratching his head a little bit the amount of pace that Van Amersfoort didn't have yesterday in qualifying.
It'll be very, very interesting as you go on your quest to ascertain exactly, and I'm grateful that our direction crew managed to throw in that replay of Nick Cassidy, because if you and I had had €100 on where Nick Cassidy made a mistake or something went wrong, it would have never been there. It was almost on the apex of turn 8, the Advan turn, which is like a kink on the back straight, it's not a mistake area, is it?
No. No, I can't. Unless the only thing I could think of in that situation is maybe if someone goes off exiting turn 7, but then the drop in pace wouldn't have been that far down the straight and into the kink. It would have been much earlier on. That looked as if something just maybe stopped momentarily coming in the back straight.
Because the pace thereafter, once he'd picked it up and lost a couple of places, but the pace thereafter was back to where it was.
And Nick had lost him a couple of positions. It got him a brief battle, shall we say. But I think he'll be quite disappointed with that. He was running P2 and had driven a very, very good race up until that moment. And it looks like something out of his hands may have dropped him off the podium.
Well, as I promised, before we bring you race 2, we will have that information and we'll be able to fill you in on exactly what happened with Nick Cassidy. We just await the podium ceremony to get underway here, where we will see Stroll, Gunther, Russell, and of course Ralph Aaron as being the best rookie. But the 1, 2, 3 is Stroll, Gunther, and George Russell. And Ralph Aaron, who actually finished the race P6, will be on the podium as best rookie, and Prema Power Team will be the team that will be represented there, as Peter Riker then brings the drivers out onto the podium. Lance Stroll takes the top step. Good shot there from Lawrence Stroll's sunglasses, reflecting his sun up there, P1. Maximilian Günther then P2. And George Russell then takes P3 for High-Tech GP. National anthem then to play out for Lance Stroll. The newly edited short version of the Canadian national anthem then plays out for Lance Stroll. Having a discussion, Lee, as Edgar Nucius, the board member for ADAC, makes the trophy presentation to Lance Stroll. Having a conversation with someone about how Lance's driving has matured, and also as a character, of course, because lost sight of the fact these are kids. You know, how he's matured as a character. But do you know what? I sometimes think, and I see Lance on the top step of the podium, don't smile a lot.
Yeah, it's...
Which is reminiscent, if I may say, of Esteban Ocon.
Yes, to a degree. I mean, in a sense, and I know with Esteban, there was even though he'd get the top position, there was always that kind of thing. Well, you know, it could have done better. Or
how?
Actually,
how?
It reminds me of a driver several years ago, and I won't reveal the name for you, but he won the race. It was F3 level. He won the race, and he was a little bit disappointed. And I asked him afterwards why, and he's like, "Well, I only technically qualified third on the grid." And he was, after he won the race, he was still disappointed.
Still beating himself up because he hadn't qualified better.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Drivers are strange creatures, Dave. They really are. You make a good point, though, that we do forget that they are young men.
Yeah.
Lance is only 17 years old, which scares me greatly. But, you know, he's a young guy. We expect sometimes these drivers to jump into race cars and for them to be mature men almost straight away, and it's simply not the case. It doesn't happen in real life, and it doesn't happen in motorsport. Lance, he is almost a different person to a sense compared to, say, early or middle of last year when he was like fresh-faced and 16. The way he thinks has matured. The way he brings himself has matured. His approach to everything in racing and even outside of the car has matured greatly. He's a much better outlook. Really, he's not as how should I say? He was sometimes maybe too emotional at times last year, and would get too upset when something didn't go quite right. He has matured to a degree now that if something doesn't work out, you know, perfectly, that, you know, he does kind of accept it and go, well, let's just work harder or work better. And that is a big change for a driver.
And he's had some, let's be truthful, he's had some setbacks.
Yeah.
You know, Zandvoort, you know, where, you know, an experimental part was put on the car, wasn't it? And you know, whatever he did that weekend, he was never going to be able to wrestle back the points that he lost because of that.
Absolutely. And realistically, and I was chatting to one of the guys at Prema before this race, and he told me that realistically, Stroll should be further ahead in this championship because they lost those points at Zandvoort. They lost points at Spa because they didn't have their dry set up correctly. They lost other points during the year because little mistakes here and there, not necessarily by the driver, but little mistakes sometimes occasionally by the team. And that can add up. Now, he's still got a very healthy advantage over Maxi in the championship. He's got good qualifying positions for the rest of this year. He's pole in race 2 and second in race 3. The team in this instance have done their bit. Now it's up to Lance to finish the job. But sometimes there have been occasions where one side has slipped or the other side has slipped too.
Well, he's done a good job in terms of doing everything that he needed to do in race 1. He could do no more. He finished P1. Stand by. We will bring you race 2 a little later, and I promise you we'll also bring you exactly what happened to Nick Cassidy midway through the race. From Lee and myself, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you for race 2. Bye-bye for now.